Ah.
One, two, three.
Hey, you guys, Ron is really sick. I'm serious. Last night, Ron got poisoned by something that he ate, and he had projectile vomiting, and it was coming out the other end, too. He was violently ill, and so we pulled him from his solo, and we put him in the tent, and there was a big snowstorm last night, so it just wasn't a very good night.
4 days into this thing, and yesterday a big storm hit. But just before it did, I went out looking for morels. When you're really hungry, you make some mistakes, and I found some morels. And I've eaten a lot of them in my time, but I picked one called the false morel. That causes diarrhea and vomiting. So in the middle of a snowstorm, I managed to spend a lot of my time outside feeding nature. And now I'm in the recovery phase, so we'll get started again after a while.
Ron's back on his solo now, and it's been raining and snowing, and we haven't been able to move our camp for the last 4 days because of the rain and snow. Ron's miserable, we're miserable, all of our gear is cold, our dogs are cold, and we're just really hoping we're going to get some good weather tomorrow.
Well, I've been looking around for food now for a couple of days. The area has been so well burnt that the ground is literally sterilized. Any of the small mammals that might have been crawling around are gone. There's not hardly any birds. There's a few floating around. They're probably looking for berries or something, but it's too early in the season for that. The fishing is gone. There's no fishing. I mean, this creek is just running water. There's nothing in it, and this makes it difficult. So as far as food goes, the only thing I've had really is my coffee and well, I guess they're called Coast Guard rations, which amounts to a couple hundred calories a day. It's nice. There are some thistles. They don't give you very many calories. In fact, I worked it out the other day. It comes out to something like 10 pounds of thistle root per day would be just about enough to keep me going if that's all I had to eat. Of course, thistle carries with it its own burden. There's a lot of fiber in it. This means that it processes incompletely, and at some point you need to eliminate the fibers that aren't processed. So that adds another dimension to the trip. It seems like it's a stop and go, stop and go. Other than that, I'm having a ball. Last night it rained for several hours, and then it snowed a little bit, and finally it dried out, then the wind started. The air temperature last night was probably down around 25 degrees, and today it looks like we've got a little blue sky, and maybe this 5-day rain shower is going to go away. So I'm going to set to it, and we'll see what we could come up with. Well, I'm trucking through the area here, trying to find an area that's got some green, and maybe there's some deep pools where the fish haven't been killed off. So that's what I'm searching for now. I'm going to do a little trucking today, and God help us, we might find something good to eat later on. Well, looks like I've come a little bit farther than I expected. I'm trying to get to a campsite here that must have been used by packers years ago. The trail we're on currently is completely wasted. It looks like after that burn 5 years ago, no one bothered to come up here to clear it, so there's just portions of it showing. And it's kind of hard to get lost. I'm down inside a canyon, so I'll just follow the canyon until I get to where the map indicates there was an improved campground. By improved, it probably means that there's at least one flat spot there for a tent. And I'll check that out. If there's any greenery around there, maybe I've got a chance to get some more thistles. Other than that, I guess I'm just going to have to go across the mountains and see if I can find some food over in another valley. Hello, Brian. This is Ron. Do you have a copy? Oh well. Generally, these little radios have about a 2-mile range, and we all have one of these things that we're using. I picked up this particular model because it has a feature in it that I find really important. It used to be a feature that I had on my watch, and even those work out well. And the feature is an altimeter/barometer. Now, those are very important in a survival kind of way for one reason. A barometer or an altimeter, and they're basically the same thing, can tell you if a storm is coming. And they do this in this way. Let's say that you have an altimeter and you know your elevation. For instance, I know that we're at roughly 6,080 feet right where I'm sitting. And we have a beautiful clear day, and I know that the weather's been stable like this for a while. I can set my altimeter to 6,080 feet. And as long as the weather stays the same, it's going to indicate the same elevation. Of course, that's depending on my staying in the same location as well. But let's say that a great big old low pressure area bringing with it a burden of storm, a snowstorm, a rainstorm, or something like we've had in the last few days come rolling through. What will happen is the pressure will drop. And when the pressure drops, the altimeter indicates an increase in elevation. So what happened to us the other day, we were at roughly 6,000 feet. I looked on there, it was set at 6,000 feet. The next morning it said 6,100, then it went to 6,200. And before that storm really hit us hard, and it did hit us hard with snow and rain and hail and everything else, we were at 6,460 feet. So we had a 460-foot elevation gain while we were in the same camp. And that's because of a low pressure area that rolled through. We were then able to track to tell when that storm was leaving us by watching the elevation start to drop. Now, if you were watching a barometer, you'd see the barometer drop. A barometer drops, and altimeter increases when the storms come in. So they're just opposite, but I use my altimeter all the time. And this little radio here has a barometer, altimeter built in. It also has a few other things like an alarm clock and a compass and a radio and odds and ends like that. These things are getting pretty fancy these days, but this is a handy thing to have with you. I just want to add that the idea of carrying a barometer or an altimeter with you up in the mountains is not a new one. Mountaineers have been doing this for probably close to 100 years now, and they've been lifesavers for that long. Well, that was amusing. Just walked over the top of Sheep Eater Pass at about 7,800 feet, ran into a bunch of snow, but no fish, no ground squirrels, no marmots, only a couple of birds. And if I ate one of those, it'd be about the size of a golf ball. And right now I got a whale-sized appetite. So we're just going to keep on down this trail and see if we can't find something to satisfy it. I looked on those rocks up there and I didn't see any sign of marmot. There's just about everything else here. There's currants and gooseberries, but none of them are ripe. There's lots of water, yeah. But I've had plenty of that. And there's no fish. So it's the same old thing. We've got shelter knocked down, that's not a problem. I can make a fire anytime. So we're into that food priority now, and that 3-week thing is going to be probably the essence of it after this. It's going to have to keep on trucking on what I got. If you're ever walking a trail in the woods and you're trying to follow the trail and you see this kind of a marking, this marking is a trail marker. They used to blaze trees. And usually it's like you see here, it's a large rectangle and a small square, one above the other. And the principle behind these things is if you stand there facing this, you'll be looking right down the trail. In fact, if they were done properly, you'll be able to see the next one from this one. So even if the trail is covered by snow and you see one of these, you should be able to stand right behind it, look straight ahead or in some direction, generally this direction, and you'll see the next blaze on the next tree. You go to that one, you look for the next blaze, and so forth, and that keeps you on the trail.
Well, it's not exactly a monster, but it's dinner. I shot him through the neck, so I wouldn't ruin a whole bunch of meat. You can see the hole there in his neck, maybe. And so we got something to chow on tonight. A couple hundred calories. I'm a happy fella. There it is. And this is my version of cave cooking. You take one squirrel, add it to water, and then a handful of sage taken from the side of the stream. Stir it in thoroughly, about like so. And then the magic ingredient is Tabasco sauce. A little of that. A little more. Just a touch more. There we go. And then, as a final step, stir it well. That's well. And eat when it's done. Oh man. Oh. This is heaven. First solid food. Tabasco is one of those things
It's like my knife. I wouldn't go on a survival trip without my Tabasco or my knife. This makes everything good. And it kills fleas, wasps, hornets, and it repels Mongol invasion. Good. Mm. Mm. Ah. It is hot. Hmm. One of the things I always advocate when you're going out on a solo trip, or even if you're just going backpacking, is a process that I refer to as journaling. Now, journaling is just a way of ordering your thoughts. You know, when you're camping, it's really important to keep your gear organized so you can find everything and you don't lose it in the dark. And it's the same way with your thoughts. When you're journaling, what you're doing is you're ordering your thoughts. You're putting them into some sort of a pattern, and later on you could go back and revisit the trip. But the important part of it is this. When you're ordering your thoughts in the wilderness, it helps you to pick out the order in the disorder of the natural environment. I find this is one of the most critical skills a person can have and use when they're on a solo experience. I always use a pencil because pencils don't freeze when it gets cold, and I can erase my mistakes. I usually carry 3 or 4 of them with me. In a solo survival situation, you may find yourself talking to yourself, and sometimes this gives you a good conversation, but sometimes not. You'll find that in the annals of solo survival, people will often take an object and talk to that object as if it was another person, and that's important for your mental health and well-being. So don't feel badly if you hear yourself talking to no one. The body is an engine, and the fuel for that engine is called the calorie. Now, in a solo survival situation, you store this energy in a couple of different forms, actually 3 different forms. One of those is as glycogen, which is like a simple sugar stored in the blood. Another is fat, and that's that pile that wraps around your waist and other places in your body. And the third is the food that's left undigested within your body. In a survival situation, it's critical that you learn how to manage the energy you have available to keep the engine running. So what is a calorie? Basically, a calorie is just the amount of energy it takes to raise a given amount of water a certain temperature. Now, there's actually a couple of different kinds of calories out there. There's a standard calorie and then the kilocalorie. And when you're buying a candy bar, you're actually talking in terms of the kilocalorie. That's the one that we want to talk about now. Now, what is that kilocalorie? Well, it's the amount of energy it takes to raise 1,000 grams of water 1 degree centigrade. Now, since a calorie is it's a metric measurement, and I'm kind of a gallon sort of a guy, I'm going to try to turn that pesky metric calorie into something that's useful for American ears. Roughly, a calorie amounts to the amount of energy it takes to raise 1 quart of water 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, how does that play into the idea of survival living, or just survival out there? Let's say, for instance, that you go out to the stream and the water's about 40 degrees. If you drink some of that water, you're going to have to raise it approximately 60 degrees. So you go down and you fill up your wide-mouth clear plastic bottle with 1 quart of 40-degree water and you drink it down. Now, how many calories is that? That's roughly 30 calories. 30 calories just to raise 1 quart of water to your body temperature. But you know what? You're going to need to drink roughly 2 gallons of water per day just to stay moving on the trail. This means that in order to raise that water to body temperature, you're going to consume roughly 240 calories, raising 2 gallons of water to your body temperature. And that's just to keep the systems rolling. Now, there's a lot of other things that consume energy as well, so let's talk about some of those. Psst, hey, he forgot to tell you, 240 calories is roughly 1 candy bar, or 6 ounces of juicy trout. We do a lot more on a daily basis than just drink cold water. One of the things we do is we live. Now, living involves a thing that we call the BMR, the basal metabolism rate. And that's the amount of energy it takes for your body to pump blood, filter the blood, breathe, and just generally keep the housekeeping chores of staying alive on track. How much does it take to do that? Well, for me, it's about 1,800 calories a day, and that's based on age, weight, height, and so forth. So if I just lay around all day and sleep, I'm going to use up 1,800 calories. I go down to the stream and I drink a couple of gallons of water, and I'm up to about 2,000. But guess what? Let's say I decide that I want to take a walk around camp, and I walk around my camp, it's nice and flat. Maybe I go searching for something, but I don't do anything exceptionally strenuous. If I walk for 4 hours, I'm going to use up another 600 calories just wandering around at the lowest and slowest pace I can possibly maintain. Even processing your food requires energy. It's called the thermic effect of food. You can take roughly 10% of the actual caloric value of the food, and that's the amount of energy it requires to process it. Yep, there's the 10% right there. Elk. You can save 20% of your energy by not taking
I can't even hold the camera still anymore.
There are a lot of nifty charts out there that tell you how many calories running or walking or some other activity requires. But there's a simple way that you can estimate how many calories you're going to need in a survival situation or out in the woods. And that's this. If you're going to be, just laying around all day, you take your body weight and you multiply it by 14. If you're walking some, you multiply it by 17. And if you're active, you multiply it by 20. Now, I weigh roughly 200 pounds, and so if I'm in a survival situation and I'm hunting and fishing and actively looking for game, I'm going to end up burning about 4,000 calories per day. If I'm sitting around in the camp and maybe walking down to the stream to get some water and do things like that, then I'm going to be burning around 2,800 calories per day. Now, just so you know, I can't be inactive in a survival situation. I have to be active. I have to do things like make a good shelter. If I don't make a good shelter, I'm going to shiver all night. Shivering requires roughly 500 calories per hour. If I spend 8 hours in the bed shivering, I'm going to burn up an additional 4,000 calories during the night. Add that to my basal metabolism rate and the energy it requires to heat up water to body temperature, and I'm running up in the 6,500 calorie range, maybe even, 7,000 calories. So pretty quickly you can see that you use up a lot of power in a survival situation. It's much better to spend a few hundred calories building a good shelter and not waste all of that power shivering during the night. This solar panel takes its power directly from the sun and puts it into the batteries we use for our cameras. But we're not like that. We have to get our energy from someplace else, and that's food. Now, what about the food that we find out here? That's something you ought to know. A rat, a marmot, a squirrel, all give you about 32 calories per ounce. That means in order to make it through the day, through our heavy calorie days, we're going to have to eat something like 7 pounds of rat, squirrel, or marmot. That's a lot. Now beef, is just a little bit different. Beef is high in fat. You see, things like rat and so forth, they're all high in protein, and so they don't have the calorie density that we have in things like beef. Beef runs in at around 72 calories per ounce, and that's a lot. So if we were running around out here just eating beef, we could get by on around 3, maybe 3.5 pounds of beef a day. Fat calories are very, very good. Now there's another way to carry calories, and that of course is in the form of sugars. Sugar carries around 120 calories per ounce, and that's a lot of power. This means that you could walk around out here every day on just about a pound or a pound and a half of sugar and get a lot of work done. You'd probably go into some kind of shock, but it also explains to you why a lot of primitive tribes find honey so appetizing and so valuable to their survival. So, Where does honey come from? Well, it comes from bugs. And what are bugs good for? For? So, where does honey come from? It comes from bugs. And what are bugs good for? Bugs are good for food. You see, things like termites and grasshoppers might kick out as many as 200 calories per ounce. Maggots a little bit less. The problem with eating bugs is something that we often refer to as the gag factor. You know, it's hard to throw your face into a bowl of maggots and start munching. But if you throw those maggots into a stew, then they just look like, well, brown rice. Keep in mind that stews are the universally accepted way to hide rotten meat and disgusting foods. Can make just about anything palatable. We've known that since pre-Roman times. That's why there have been so many stews in all those cookbooks. Got to hide that nasty stuff. I want to add one more little thing here. You know, if you expect to come out into the wilderness and survive just on plant life, you're probably going to have a pretty hard time if you're going to be out here for any period of time. There just isn't the caloric density in the natural edible plants that you find out in the wilderness. Oh, sure, in specific environments you'll find one or two plants that have a lot of fat and a lot of protein and some sugars and so forth, and you can make it. But in the American wilderness, that's not the case. You're going to need to eat flesh if you want to survive. I taught wilderness survival in a university for a couple of decades, and during that time, I had an opportunity to watch a lot of different people up there in the mountains. And one of the things that I noticed is that after a couple of days, the guys that had muscles on their muscles, bumps on their bumps, macho monkeys, these guys would get out there and they were the first ones to start falling apart. My God, look at this guy. He could lift, well, hell, he could lift these big old boulders, but you know what? He couldn't lift his leg after a couple of days. And the reason was he didn't have the body reserves. Lots of power for the short term, but no power, no stamina, and no ability to continue on if they didn't continue to have food coming into their system. Well, the food that's already in your system is the body battery, and I refer to that as survival muscle. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. Let me show you what survival muscle looks like. This is survival muscle. Now, just before I came up here, I made sure that my survival muscles were properly built up. And it looked something like that. As the days wore on and I ate less and less, the battery, the survival muscle started to disappear. Some people call it a diet. I call it good living. And it's important. If you're going out on a survival situation, you carry around a few thousand calories. I say, what do you mean a few thousand calories? Well, I'll tell you what a few thousand calories is. That's right. You see, every pound of human fat reconverted to energy gives you somewhere between 3,600 and 4,000 calories of power. That means that when I wandered up in here, actually waddled up here into the mountains, I was carrying along about a 2-week supply of chow. That's pretty good. So I had a lot of extra power stored right here. Now, I can't just turn that into energy to use. You see, it takes power to make power. Remember we were talking about thermic conversion of food? Well, you have to convert this into food energy somehow. And in order to do that, I need to supply myself with some calories, some external calories, something like carbohydrates or something to fuel the process of digesting my own body. This is called a catabolic metabolism, and it takes time to get started. Fasting is a survival skill. If you fast for 24 hours, it teaches your body how to start to convert survival muscle into power. You need to fast just to learn how to convert this stuff into something that keeps you busy on the trail and nice and warm at night. A little tip about the body battery. Once you start to use that battery, you're going to start to produce some chemicals called ketones. Now, ketones stink. If you're with another person in a survival situation, you're going to say, "My God, you smell. You ought to take a bath." Well, they're thinking the same thing about you, because ketones are part of the natural process of converting your body fat into energy. Remember that. If you're going to hail a cab while you're on a diet, you better be chewing some double mint gum.
Well, I've been fishing this stream. It's like fishing an irrigation channel or something like that. there's no fish in it. It's, I guess it's more for the meditative qualities and for the possibility that I might actually get food out of it. So after spending probably 1,000 calories fishing all day, I've decided that there's got to be a better way to feed my belly. In the meantime, I'm simply digesting my belly, which is kind of good, makes those old pants fit a little bit better.
Here's a hint to help you run a good wilderness kitchen. Now, when you're running a campfire, you don't have a burner control to control the height of the flame, but what you can do is make a setup like this for controlling the height of your cook can over the fire. Now, what you do is you take a green stick like this and cut a few hooks on it and use green wood. What this stick does is keep your parachute cord, which will burn, up away from the fire. And it also gives you a place to hook one or more cans so that the whole cook party can keep their cans cooking all at the same time. Conserves resources, uses the hot rising air very efficiently, and later this entire A-frame will serve as a frame for your shelter.
I noticed that folks in the other camp had set up one of Radio Ray's famous crankshaft can lifters here, so I came over to take advantage of their fire, and I wanted to make some cowboy coffee. Now, some of you have seen this in Volume 10, and some of you don't even know it exists, but cowboy coffee is just a way the coffee's been made for many, many years, and it starts out with a can of boiling water. You want to make sure you got a rolling boil. First step after you get that is to grab the right amount of coffee, and this is critical. The right amount is the amount that fits in your hand. That's about enough for about a quart, which is about what I require to get my heart started in the morning. So I'm just going to put that in there and stir it in a little bit. Now, if I had some salt, I'd add a little bit of salt, and that would help to settle the grounds. Without salt, I can use eggshells. If I powder up some eggshells, I could put that in there. Anything with calcium in it or any salt, anything to break the surface tension, is going to help these things to sink. Now, a lot of people take it after they add these grounds, they'll take it and they'll put it back over the fire. And let me warn you about that. If you put it back over the fire like this and it starts to boil again, those floating grounds are going to act like a cap on the water. And before long, the water is going to start to rise and you're going to boil over and lose most of your coffee. So you really don't want to reboil. What I'm doing here is just holding it over there to kind of heat it a little bit, make sure that it's good and hot. And after about 5 minutes or so, these grounds are going to sink to the bottom. After they've sunk to the bottom, I'll just pour the pure, naturally caffeinated coffee into my cup, and I'm on my way. Definitely on my way. So we'll just set this aside and let these grounds sink down in there a little bit. Stir it occasionally. Oh boy, look at that. It's been about 5 minutes now, so let's take a look at that coffee. I'll just scoop some out. You can see now that it's good and clear. All those grounds have settled down. They're all at the bottom. The trick now is to pour the coffee out of the can without disturbing the sediment. And even if you do get some of those grounds in there, they're not going to hurt you any, but you can still let them settle in your cup. So it's time for some Java. And this looks like a good strong batch. You notice I've carved a little notch in the bottom of my spoon so I can pick up this hot can. Now I'll just get a little of the good stuff here. Oh God, that looks good. Just a little bit. I want the rest of it to continue to percolate. Meanwhile, this spoon here has been through all kinds of things, so I need to clean it. Best place to clean it is in there with that coffee. That makes everything else I taste later taste like coffee. Whoa. I bet you wish you were here. Ordinarily, when you're setting up your shelter, you'll want to set it up about 50 feet above the valley floor. That way you keep yourself out of that cold blowing wind that whistles down through the canyons. But you see, in this area at this time of year, it's been fairly warm at night. In fact, it was 35 to 40 degrees last night. That's when I woke up shivering and took a look at it. And that's not particularly cold. Now you see, I don't need really to spend the extra energy to climb the side of a mountain to set up a shelter. It's good enough to be down here at the bottom of the valley close to the water, and I'll make a nice shelter to protect myself. Now what I've chosen for that shelter is this tree. This tree is on the upstream side of me. That is downstream that way. The wind tonight will be blowing from that direction to that direction. So this tree will act as a barrier to stop the wind. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut down into this grass and I'm going to make a nice little nest. Then I'm going to cover these branches with some plastic, or actually with my poncho. I'll take some material, lay it on the ground to stop heat loss through conduction into the ground, put some more material down, and guess what? I've got a nice cozy shelter for the night. At least I'll find out about 4 o'clock in the morning when tooth flakes start to fly out my cheek. But a couple of minutes of shivering is always good for the soul. So let's get started on this thing. Whenever you're sleeping in a dead wood forest, you've got to be careful of those dead trees. You see, those are often called widow makers. They don't make you widowed, they make you dead. So you've got to be very careful that one of these things isn't going to blow down on you during those strong gusts that might occur during the night. So check the branches and the trees that are around you, and that will save you a lot of compression time. Generally, when I'm on a Generally, when I'm on a survival, I love this story, solo survival. Ready? Generally, when I'm on a solo survival trip, I like to make small fires like this one here. Generally, on a solo survival trip, I make small fires like this one here. And you can see I don't have any stones around it or anything, just a cleared area in the ground. The reason for that is this. You see, when I make a small fire like this, I don't have to gather a lot of firewood, and that means I save energy. I don't need a fire that warms the sky, I just need to warm myself. And in addition to that, without having to gather all these stones, I've saved some power, and I've helped to keep the environment fairly clean. See, I don't have a bunch of stained stones left over. There's no monument to my having been here. Another thing about that, this shelter over there is located a little distance from the fire. Now, it's always a temptation to build your fire close to your shelter so the heat reflects back up into the shelter. But it's fairly warm here tonight, and this is perfectly adequate. You see, when this fire burns down to just embers, it's going to be kicking off smoke. And I don't want that smoke coiling back up into my shelter. One of the things we find ourselves doing out here is we take the synthetic environment and we drag it out into a natural environment with us. What I mean by that is this. We're so used to working an 8-hour day and sleeping an 8-hour night that we tend to impose those same kinds of constraints on ourselves in the natural environment. What I'm saying to you is this. If you expect to sleep 8 hours during the night, you're going to find that pretty shortly you're not going to be doing that. In fact, you're going to be sleeping for a little while. You're going to wake up, look around, fall back to sleep, and like that. That's a perfectly natural way to sleep. In tribal times, that's exactly how tribes would work it. Somebody would be awake all the time, just for a few minutes at a time, but somebody else would wake up when that person went to sleep and so forth. There's always somebody on watch for threat, and that is a natural way for us to sleep. Don't let it bother you if you find yourself waking up a lot. It doesn't mean your shelter is bad or you're uncomfortable. It just means you're getting into the natural order. You're getting away from the synthetic environment and back into the natural environment, and that's a good thing. Telling somebody how to sleep with a blanket is like trying to explain how to go to the bathroom. Everybody knows how to sleep under one, but not everybody knows how to wrap up with one for cold weather. Now I'm going to show you something that's often called a sheep herder's wrap, and this is a way that I usually wrap myself up in a blanket for nights like this. And I'll tell you this, the advantage of this wrap is that once you're wrapped up in it, as you roll around during the night, the thing tends to stay in place and you don't kick it off. I'll show you how it's done. I just have it over my shoulders now. First step is to kick your hat off, raise it up as high over your head as you possibly can, and drop it down. This will cover the back of your neck and your head. Bring it forward. Now we reach down near the knees on both sides, like so, and wrap them around each leg, like this. Now I've reached inside, and these are now something like a pair of pants. Now you may have noticed that when I wrapped up like that, I covered my face completely. The reason for that is this. When you breathe in cold air, you breathe out warm air, and that's energy that you could conserve. When you cover your face, you're breathing that warm air back into the blanket, back into the microclimate that you've created around your body, and that helps to keep you warm. Now you might think to yourself, well, what about all the moisture on the breath? Isn't that going to make you wet? Well, it could. If you were in a waterproof environment, yeah, it would start to condense and you might get a little bit moist. but blankets by their nature tend to breathe. So the moisture tends to make its way out, fresh air tends to make its way in, but the heat definitely stays in there to keep you warm. If you're in a real survival situation, you probably won't have any choice over the kind of clothing that you're wearing. But if you're just going to go up surviving, testing out your solo survival skills, you will have a choice, and the choice you make is important. Now, in order to make a good, educated choice, you need to know about the insulating value of clothing. The measurement that we use to talk about insulation and clothing is called the CLO unit. Now, there's several different ways of measuring the insulating value of clothing, but the one we use is the CLO unit. And there's sort of a range of insulation within the CLO unit spectrum. For instance, 0 CLO units is naked. Yeah, I'm out here naked running around. Okay, that's 0. 4 is that guy that's all hooked up in his mucklucks and skins and so forth, the Eskimo. That's a 4. Now, you can't go much higher than that and still be mobile. You'd be kind of robotic, you know, you can't move if you get much more insulation on than an Eskimo carries. So we kind of say that all of our insulating value is between 0 and 4. Well, what is 1 CLO unit? 1 CLO unit is the equivalent of one man's winter wool suit. That's a pair of pants, a shirt, a vest, a nice little tie, and a jacket. That's 1 CLO unit. Now, how does it work back from that? Well, let me tell you, a lot of people go into the wilderness and they wear a pair of jeans or cotton pants, they put on a cotton t-shirt and a cotton long sleeve shirt, and they wander around out there, and then they wonder why they're so darn cold all the time. Well, the reason they're cold is that outfit is only about a half a CLO unit. In other words, your jeans, your shirt, and so forth are less than a man's winter suit. Now, where do you come up a little bit from that? The easiest way to come up is to put on military BDUs. That's a battle dress uniform. And remember, that's just a pair of pants and kind of a longish shirt with a t-shirt and underwear. That's about 90% of 1 CLO unit. Actually, it's 0.89 of a CLO unit. Gives you good protection. Well, why the big difference between cotton and that BDU? It seems like the BDU would be lighter. Well, the BDU is lighter. But you see, what the BDU has is it has a nice tight weave, and it's made of polyester. That helps to keep the wind from blowing in and helps you to retain the heat close to your body. Cotton doesn't do that. It can't do that. In fact, when cotton gets wet, it holds moisture up against your body, and you blow away that heat so much faster. You just lose heat. You can't dry out the cotton. BDUs, on the other hand, those will not retain the water. They get wet, and the water seeps down the fabric and out, and they dry very quickly. So that's the kind of clothing you're searching for, a synthetic that sheds water. It doesn't have to be waterproof. It just has to be the kind of material that's going to shed the water. It's going to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Like my pants here. My pants are made out of a material called Cordura, and this stuff is tougher than hell. This stuff I can run all kind of through briar patches and what have you, and I won't get any tears on it. I can get them wet. Walk out there in the stream, come back up here. In 30 minutes, they're going to look dry, and they're going to feel dry all that time. These things keep me warm even when they're wet. If these were jeans, I'd be dead tomorrow morning. Other clothes. I've chosen this shirt here. It feels like cotton. It's got that same hand, the same comfort level. But this is a synthetic fabric, and it too, if it's wet, it feels warm, and it will dry very rapidly. As an underlayer, I have a polar fleece vest. This thing too, you get it wet, it feels warm. It's the kind of clothing that I choose for this sort of thing, and in fact, these pieces of clothing and the t-shirt I'm wearing are all that I have up here, no matter what the temperatures reach. Now, of course, I've got on my buckskin jacket here. What does that do? How does that fit into the CLO unit? Well, really what it is it's not really waterproof, because water can soak through this kind of material. It takes a little while for it to get through, but it can get it wet. It really is a wind protector. It stops the wind from getting through, and as long as it's dry, it gives me good insulation. But that's the combination I chose when I decided to come up here and do survival. And it's a combination that I've been using for many, many years and find successful.
Oh, just remember, when you go survivaling, cotton kills.
It's important to remember that a properly built survival shelter will leave no trace once you've gone. In a couple of days, all these flattened grasses will be standing tall, straight and healthy again, and anybody who walks through here will never know that I spent the night right there.
Yes, he is.
Okay, gunshots. Be ready for a sound. One, two, three.
Just so you know, we've been having problems with that moose here for the last 3 or 4 days. He'll come come close to camp, stomp a little bit. It's obvious that he's getting more and more aggressive and more comfortable with us. We're not far from having a direct encounter with him. This last encounter, we just decided to fire some rounds in the air above his head. Hopefully that'll drive him away long enough for us to get the heck out of here. We'll be moving tomorrow morning to another area, and we think it'll be out of the range of that particular moose. But moose can be very, very aggressive, and they can kill you pretty easily. That thing probably weighed close to 2,000 pounds. So we're going to be out of here, but I want you to know that animal is fine right now. When you find yourself in a survival situation, it's a good idea to find some way to relieve the tension, because it will build up. Now, that moose was stomping all over my camp, and that got me a little irritated. So I needed to find some way to lighten up. And what I did, in fact what we did, is we settled down to a little bit of song and dance. Take a look.
Where is it? Where is it? Who let the moose out?
Who let the moose out? Who let the moose out? Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out?
I'd like to show you a couple of little tricks related to capturing small game in the wilderness. The first one is called the whistle up. And the whistle up requires 2 people, one person who can whistle and the other who could swing a club. Let me demonstrate. This flower here represents a rabbit in a field. And what we want to do is we want to get this rabbit into our stew pot. Now normally if you walk up to the rabbit, he's going to duck down into his hole. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to walk up to the rabbit, so he will duck down into the hole. But there'll be 2 people. This is one person and this is the other. Now, these people will walk in a synchronized manner so their feet hit the ground at the same time, but one person will be whistling. That's this guy. This guy is the club man. So they'll be walking along. The club man stops behind the hole. The rabbit now is down in the hole. The whistler continues to walk. And as he walks away, the rabbit is curious and he sticks his head up out of the hole to see who walked past, and the club man takes out the dinner. Now let's watch Brian and Ray demonstrate this special technique on some wildlife found out here in the wilderness. Rabbit, rabbit, rabbit. Rabbit is out of his hole. Rabbit is in his hole. Rabbit is out of his hole. The rabbit is dinner in the pot. The next technique is called the Apache circle. Now if you've ever walked in the desert or in the mountains where there are a lot of rabbits, you'll know that sometimes as you're walking along, a rabbit will suddenly burst from a bush right by your feet. Sometimes it scares the heck out of you. Well, that's what we're going to take advantage of in this technique. Now once again, we have our friendly rabbit here, the rabbit flower. The way it works is this. You're walking along, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and you look over here and you see the rabbit. You don't want to approach the rabbit because if you do, he'll take off, and all you're armed with is a club. So what you do is you walk past the rabbit. Da 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 da. And you make a circle around him until you're within range. Ah! And you get him. Dinner. Rabbit, rabbit, rabbit! Ah! Dinner!
Nietzsche, sick. Sick. Good girl.
Good girl.
Good girl.
Good girl. Bring me the rabbit. Oh, we've got dinner.
What a
Yay! Woo! You! Get it, girl. Woo! Get it, get it, get it. Whoa.
Give it to her. She'll probably take it.
Hey, girl. Go get it. Here, hey. Hey. Go get it, go get it.
Get out of the way, Ron. Oh, she won't pick it up. She wants that ball.
Sometimes you need to convert big pieces of wood into small pieces of wood. And I've seen more than a few people take out their great big old knife or their machete or their hatchet and try to chop it into smaller pieces. But it's a waste of energy. The easy way is just to slam a stick like this against another piece of wood or a rock, and it'll break off in small pieces. Let me show you what I mean. And now I have some small pieces of wood to work with. But sometimes when you do that, the wood doesn't break apart in that way, and it's a little springy. That's when we move on to the next level, to the radio ray hydraulic technique. Let me show you what that is. Now, Ray is a little bit larger than the average guy, but still these 8-inch logs are nothing for him. One of the things I try to do with my survival gear is make sure that I've always got it with me. One of the examples of that is this little thing here called the Fire Genie. Inside of this I've got a fire starting tool, a little sparker hidden right up here, and then there's a little blade that I can use to scrape it. So I have a way of starting a fire in this nice little package. I also have my belt here. The belt is actually 30 feet of parachute cord tied up in a special way that we call ladder lacing. There's probably a lot of different names for it, but let me show you how to do ladder lacing. To do the ladder lace, all you need to do is you make a loop like you see here. This loose piece over the top of the other. I'll do that again for you, like that. Now I've got a little loop. I'm going to reach up through the loop and grab a piece of cord and pull it through. Now I've got another loop, and I'll reach through and I'll pull it through. Reach through and pull it through. Reach through and pull it through. You can see how quickly it starts to grow. Through, 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 through. Just keep on going until you got it all used up. See how fast I made that much. Let me show you how quickly you can get at your cord when you use ladder lacing. First of all, there's one little knot right at the end that's kind of the key to the whole thing. Once you pull that, it just sort of strips out like this into a single line. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of cord. When I get to the end here, I'll show you just how much there is. Now, this is how much rope I was able to keep wrapped around my waist and use as a belt for an emergency. There you go there. Let me show you another way to use insect repellent. Insect repellent makes a good fire accelerant when you want to start a fire. Now if the wood is wet, you might find that it's a little difficult to get things going. What I have here is some black moss taken from a tree, and usually if you look around, even in a heavy thunderstorm,
you find some of this black moss stuck up against the side of the tree, and it's pretty easy to harvest, and it makes a pretty good tinder for starting fires. So I'll use my little fire genie here. There we go. And I'll put a little of this stuff on there, this insect repellent, and you can see how she burns there. Burns just like an oil. Once you get that going good, because now that stuff will burn a lot longer, then you could go ahead and put your little sticks on there and get your regular fire started. But I do want you to know that insect repellent is a good way to help you to get a fire started and to keep it going while you build up a bigger fire, even with wet wood.
Someday you may find yourself in a survival situation where you need a hook to catch small game or fish. Well, if you want to make a fishing or a hooking setup, what you need is your parachute cord with those fine inner lines, some source of bone like a skull, a rock, and a knife to do your carving. Let me get started and I'll show you a couple of different types of hooks you can make. First step is to get some bone. So we're going to break this thing apart and look for a nice piece. What we're looking for is a solid piece without a lot of marrow chambers in it. Marrow chambers are the open area on the inside of the bone here. And that tends to weaken anything you're working with. What we want is solid bone. A leg would be even better, but we're going to work with this skull. There we go. This is a nice piece here. It doesn't have any marrow chambers in it. It's solid bone all the way through, and it's fairly thin, which is what we want. So the next step is going to be to make a square or a rectangle out of this piece of bone. First thing I'm going to do is scribe some grooves with the point of the blade across the bone so it'll break easily right where I want it. I'll just cut into it a little bit here with the tip of this knife. And then you could either use a piece of wood or another knife, or as I'm using here, my Gerber tool, and you want to snap it where you scored it. So now I've got one square side here. Now we're going to make another one. Okay. This didn't break quite where I scribed it. That's because of the way bone is, but it did give me a nice L shape here, and that's really what I'm after. So I'm going to try again. We're going to scribe another line here, and hopefully this time we'll get her to snap. Now I could use the saw on my Swiss Army knife to make this groove faster, but I wanted to show you that it could be done just with a pocket knife, something like that. Now let's hope this breaks easier. Whoop, there you go. So now we're getting there. We've got, believe it or not, almost the shape of a hook. The next step is going to be to cut another line in and make something that looks a little bit like a J. There we go. And these lines have to be a little deeper because we really want to be sure that this part breaks where we want it to. You can use the back of your blade to scribe the bone like this if you've got a good strong lock on your blade like the one that's on this Topps Magnum folder here. Ordinarily what I do is I cut a square of bone about like this, and then I scribe in the inside another square like so, and then I cut here and here. What will happen is I'll take this piece off, and this makes one hook here once I carve it out, and this makes a second hook here. But because the bone broke, I've only got this little square here, this little corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut into this like this and bring that up like so and around like this, about like that, and that will make my hook. We now have the basic shape of the fish hook. Now I'm going to bring her down a little bit, make it sharp, and then I'll have an actual fish hook to go fishing with. This is the hook as it finally turned out, and you can see what I've done here is I've gone and carved a point on it, and instead of using stuff from my survival kit, like the line from the inside of the 550 cord, I just took some pine sap, and you've already seen how to make pitch in Volume 4, and made up some primitive cordage out of sedge grass as a fishing line. I wanted to show you how this whole affair would come together. Now at the same time, I also took another piece of bone and made another little hook blank, you can see here, and you can see how this thing is cut out of a blank like that. But that's your basic fish hook or hook made from a piece of bone. Let me show you another way to make a hook. This is another type of hook made out of bone. It's called a gorge hook. And as you can see, I've already put some pine sap or pitch around the outside and have my little piece of cord here. What I'll do is I'll wrap this around inside that pine sap and let it harden. Now the way this one works, these gorge hooks, is you turn it parallel, something like this, to the string. It'll look about like this, and then you drive that gorge hook into a piece of bait. When the fish or animal swallows it, it will turn sideways in their throat like this, and there you go. You got them. Pull them right on out. Here's another example of a gorge hook that was made from a safety pin taken out of my mini kit. I just snipped the safety tip off of it, and using the loop and a piece of snare wire, made up this hook. And again, what you do is you just turn it so it's parallel, like so, with the wire, and then drive it into your bait, like a worm or something, and when the animal swallows it, this will turn sideways in their throat, and you got them. So that's another real simple way to make a fishing hook or a hook out of materials that you might have with you in your kit. Just as a reminder, in the survival kit video we showed how to make a gigging hook, and this one is made with 3 of those little safety pins. I've just wired them together with the snare wire, and they work in pretty much the same way as a regular gig. You just drop it down and lift it up underneath the animal, and it hooks it in the bottom of its belly. And it's a pretty effective but highly illegal fishing method.
The sunglasses I'm wearing here are polarized sunglasses, and you've probably seen that in advertising before, but you might not know what polarizing does. When you're a fisherman, it makes it a lot easier for you to see through the surface reflections on the water. It gets rid of some of the rays of light that scatter up and act as reflection. Let me show you what I mean. Without polarizing sunglasses, this is what the stream looks like, and I can't tell if there's any fish in there. But once I put them on, this is the view I get at the bottom. So you can see these things are real helpful when it comes to fishing for trout. I found this little egg here when I saw a bird take off from the shore. Now a lot of birds like to nest along the shore of these little creeks, and when you see that, as you walk along, you see them pop up out of the grass and take off. If it's in the right time of year, you might find their eggs in those nests, and with enough of the eggs you can make a nice meal. Now this is just one egg, and it's the only one I found, so I'm going to leave it right where it is and let it turn into another bird. So we're going to let this one go back to sleep.
Well, here we are. I've got to go over there, and to do that I've got to cross this little creek. I checked the temperature of the water in there, and it's 36 degrees. That's pretty chilly. But just so you know it, if you try to walk across a stream that's 36 degrees in your bare feet, halfway across your feet are going to start screaming at you. And then they're going to lose all sensation altogether. You might find yourself stepping onto a slippery rock or anything else and fall down in the stream and you'll be totally wet. And that's not good for survival. What I'm going to do here at this stream is I'm going to take off my shoes, I'm going to take out the inserts, I'm going to take off my socks. I'm going to roll up my pants, I'm going to put some plastic bags inside of my shoes, hide those socks, and I'm going to walk across in my boots. When I get to the other side, I'll drain the boots, wipe them out, put the inserts back in, put on my dry socks, and continue on my way. That's the way you ought to handle it, but there's a couple other tricks, and I'll show you those while we're crossing the stream. When you get to this stage, you want to make sure that your boots are laced on very tightly. You want to create as much of a waterproof seal as possible with that plastic bag. So I'm going to crank that thing down until I don't feel any blood. And once I'm there, I have a better chance of not getting a lot of water in as I cross. I'm also not going to tie a fancy knot. This is just a light little extra knot, and I'll tuck it into the plastic there. The pants will come up above the knees. I don't think the water's any deeper than that. So that's about all we need to do to prepare for this part of the crossing. When you're crossing a stream like this, or a faster stream, one of the things to keep in mind is never button your gear all the way up. In other words, don't tighten your waist belt or your chest belt or any of the other straps. You want to be able to toss your pack aside if you go down. You can go back and get that pack later, but if you have it strapped to your body, it can drag you underwater and drown you in a hurry. There's something else. I mentioned that you want to face upstream. You're going to be using something we call a tripod. The legs will be spread something like this, and you'll be facing inward. Your walking stick will be on the uphill side, or up into the current. Now if you're facing the other direction, and you want to place your walking stick, the natural tendency is for the water to sweep the stick away, and you then have to lean farther forward, which would force you to step forward, possibly into an area that could trip you up. So I generally recommend face upstream. So let's get this over with.
That water's cold. Yeah, buddy, that's cold.
Hey Ray, welcome to the other side.
Good to be here.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Now for a fire.
Yes.
I think it's about time to get some dry socks on. And I definitely need to try my boots. That's what I call invigorating.
Watch yourself.
Hey, I can't feel my legs. Oh my god, that is so cold. Oh my god. It's to the point like right before it's gonna go numb. You know how it really hurts? Oh god. Oh my god. I couldn't pull my pants up all the way because they're too small at the bottom. So there was no sense in me pulling them up at all, so I just left them down.
Now, one thing I learned, I put my trash bags on to use kind of as waders, but one thing I learned you got to be careful of, I tucked them into my pant legs here so that when it got deep the water didn't inadvertently wash in here, creating big heavy balloons and dragging me downstream. So something to be careful about.
When you're going through a swampy area like this, which is mostly just grasses and a lot of water under it, it helps to take a step. It's kind of a sweep. So you sort of sweep the grasses to the side, and that gives you a little bit of a platform to step on. Like so. It's not 100%, but it's better than going in up to your elbows. How's it going back there?
Woo!
Woo!
Ow!
Oink oink!
Freaking cold back here.
Cold?
Yeah.
Woo! Welcome to an Idaho summer.
Snowed on.
Yeah,
what?
That's true. This would be a good pick.
Yeah, this is what it's like in Idaho
Yeah,
in June.
Stay out! Stay away! This was a surface run trap, and you can see got a little friend here. He's probably a little angry right now, but this will be dinner shortly. We've got about 10 traps in the ground, and just this one on the surface run on a trail that he would run along. And so let's take him back for dinner. Just so you know, when you pick up even these little guys here, they get kind of cantankerous, and this one laid into my sleeve. It's a good idea not to put your finger in their mouth.
Hi, Nietzsche. Wave, Karen.
Nietzsche, sit.
Sit.
Sit, girl.
Sit.
Nietzsche, sit. She's sitting on me.
So tired, Brian. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is N0EKU.
That Ron Hood. You know, he just fucking...
He sent me down for water.
Well, he sent me over to get, you know, another pack.
You know, I'm sure Karen tried to stop him.
Oh, yeah, you know, I'm sure she did, but... You know, she's already in the plane, and she had Nietzsche in her lap, so, you know... well...
Here we sit.
Here we sit.
There's only one thing we can do about this. What's that?
I've been practicing survival skills in countries all around the world for the last 30 years. And even with all of that experience, I still very seldom go out on a solo survival experience. And there's a good reason for it. The incident you saw in this video with those mushrooms, well, that could have been lethal. And if I hadn't had my support crew with me, there's a good chance with the bad weather, the diarrhea, the vomiting, and the rest of it, it could have killed me. And it can kill you too. You never know when that kind of an emergency might crop up. And if you chose to put yourself in a survival situation and you die, you blew it. When we decided to film this video, I sat down and, well, began to write. And for about 6 months I worked on a script that covered all of the techniques and all of the different kinds of shots and so forth that we'd like to put into the video. And then we began to implement it. We set up for the airplane and we located a site and went through everything. Finally the day came and we went back there into the mountains and we found something we didn't expect. The area had been burned over. You saw it. There were no fish in the stream. There were no animals on the ground. It was not at all like we expected. But we could have turned right around, got back on that airplane and taken off, found ourselves an ideal spot and done everything that's in this little script. But we didn't. Instead, what we did is we showed you exactly what real survival is like. Oftentimes conditions are less than ideal. In fact, most of the time in survival, conditions are less than ideal, and they were for us. But we did it anyway, and with the exception of one 24-hour period there when I was uncomfortable, I stayed out there on a solo trip, separate from the crew, and did the job. And that's what you need to do. But don't forget, I had that crew there for support, just as you ought to have somebody with you when you decide to go solo survivaling. Even if the both of you are on a survival experience, you should be able to camp close enough to help each other, far enough that you can still maintain that separation that makes a solo survival experience valuable. By now you're probably wondering what kind of gear I recommend for solo survivaling. So let's take out a couple of minutes and examine that gear. In the meantime, if you'd like a complete list of the gear we brought along on this trip, just visit our website at www.survival.com and you'll find the list in there. After watching that video, you probably wonder what kind of gear I brought along for this thing. So what I've done is I've put it all together right here so I could give you a couple of pointers about packing your gear for a solo survival trip. Now altogether my gear and sleeping equipment, all that stuff, came to about 18 pounds. And let me show you how it works out. First thing I want to do is show you the clothes. Now I don't include that in the 18 pounds because you're going to wear something anyway unless you're in the Bahamas. So what I usually wear is these kinds of boots here. You've probably seen taller boots. I like tall boots. They give me good ankle support. And when I'm going through wet areas, these things here tend to seal up pretty good. So I like a good tall boot. Incidentally, these boots have a steel shank, and that's a support element that goes right inside the arch of the foot and helps to give that arch a lot of extra support when you're walking. So those are the boots. Now, I only had one pair of socks with me. Generally, a person would probably carry at least a couple of pairs of socks, but survival trip, I only had one pair. And there they are. I use Thorlo socks, they're called, and they got a good padded bottom, padded heel, and they're made out of a combination of nylon and wool. They're a little more expensive, but these things will last a long time. You could walk thousands of miles in a pair of Thorlo socks, and they'd still work fine. Plus, you don't have to wash them all that often. Now, a couple other little odds and ends. In order to keep the weight down, I've been suggesting that you use, well, we call it an ass rag, instead of toilet paper. Toilet paper clutters up the wilderness. So I I have mine here. That's, of course, just one of these little headbands. Just so you know, I marked it so that I could tell which one is for what. You can see this one is that, and then this one here is for that. There you go. You just use the opposite sides of the cloth depending on what you want to use it for. That adds a little adventure to your trip, especially at night. Now, I usually carry a couple of pairs of gloves. I use these kind of heavy leather gloves for picking things up. If you cut your hands while you're out in the wilderness, you're going to open yourself up to infection, and of course that will make things more difficult for you. So I carry a pair of heavy leather gloves. For protection of my hands, I carry a pair of these wool gloves. So they're actually mittens, but they have fingers on them. You've seen them throughout the video. Your fingers will fold on right up through here. Just slip one on like that so you can grip things, and if it gets cold, the top just pops over the top like so, and now I have mittens. These are real comfortable, and I usually wore those. In fact, I wore them every night when I went to bed. Kept my hands nice and warm. On my body, I was allowing myself a t-shirt, a little one like that, sleeveless job so I get some air. A pair of underwear. Now, about the underwear, these underwear actually serve also as swim trunks. So I've got, these are, by the way, not cotton. These are polyester underwear. So I've got a polyester underwear that serves as swim trunks if I decide to go swimming. The pants themselves you've already seen in here. These are made out of another kind of a polyester. This one is Cordura, and these are made by North Face. They have a double thick butt. In other words, there's 2 layers of fabric on the butt and 2 layers on the knees as well. These things dry very rapidly if they get wet, and they're wind tight. You saw the belt that I use. Parachute cord. You already know how to make this. As far as the shirt goes, again, polyester. This one's made by Columbia, but it's a polyester long sleeve shirt. And this will go on over the top of that short sleeve shirt that I've already showed you. On top of that, I have my little balaclava or little hat here, and this helps to reduce heat loss through radiation to the dark night skies. And on top of that, I have my little polar fleece vest, I guess you could call it. And this, of course, is a polyester, so if it gets wet, it's still warm. So that's the basic stuff that I wear while I'm walking. Now there's more to it, of course. There's the hat to keep the sun off the top of the old bald skull there.
Oh, you know, those knees start to hurt after a while. I wasn't made for this stuff.
Well, anyway, here's my hat. I've got a little belt here made of wool, and my leather jacket that you saw Karen make in Cave Cooking 3. So that's it for clothing, and pretty much if it was too hot, I would just take this baby off and tie it onto my belt, and the rest of the stuff was fine. If it got warmer, I could take off the Polar Guard or Polar Fleece vest or whatever else I needed. But that's it for clothes. There weren't any extras, just the stuff that I pretty much wore. Well, the knees gave out, so I'm just going to kick back and tell you about the rest of it. Let me show you how I carry loads on these kinds of trips. This is a little shoulder bag. I washed it just for you folks so you'd see it all nice and clean. But this is a little shoulder bag that comes from Low Alpine, and it has a flap here like so, and under the flap there's a nice place here for pencils and navigation gear and all that kind of good stuff. You can even zip it up and put a handgun in there if you want to, but it kind of clips together like that. The main compartment is located right up at the top here, and it will hold quite a bit of stuff, particularly since you see here there's like a little seam, and I'll show you from the other side what that seam does. There's a zipper in it, so when you unzip it, it expands quite a bit, and it'll hold a lot of stuff. Now you might think, well, that might be a lot of weight to have on your shoulder, and you're right, it is a lot to have slung across your neck, but it does have attachment points down here for a little waist belt, and I generally attach it to my waist to control the load, and this works out quite nicely. It's a nice, comfortable little way to carry stuff, and things are pretty convenient in this. But this is one way. The way I chose for this trip was this pack here, made by Camelback. And this is actually how the thing went up there. I'll show you a little bit about what went into it and how I put it all on here. First of all, for self-defense and for small game, I carry a Glock Model 30. It's in .45 caliber, holds 10 rounds, and I carried about 30 rounds up there. The only thing I actually had to shoot with it was, well, shoot at was that, I didn't even shoot at it, I shot towards it, that moose. And anyway, that fits right on the outside there. The notebook fits right in the little outside pocket, so I can whip it out and do some work if I need to. Down at the bottom here, this is my poncho. So if it starts to rain, I've got immediate access to my poncho. I can just pull this baby out and slip it over the top. Think about that for a second. With the clothes that I just showed you, now I get to slip a poncho over the top. So this adds even more insulation to it because it stops the wind and the wetness. So this is actually a part of the clothing. The pack itself has multiple pockets on it. And remember, this is made by Camelback, so it's a water carrier. And I'll just open this up a little bit. Inside here is a little spice packet. I've got a number of different kinds of spices. Some of the foods that you eat aren't really appealing sometimes. You know, it's a roadkill kind of stuff, so you want to add things to it. And of course, you always know that Tabasco sauce makes everything great, and it fights bacteria and cleans your teeth. So I keep some small ones in here as well as a large bottle of Tabasco sauce. In the main compartment here, zip that baby open, is lo and behold, another bag. Well, sometimes I don't want to carry my big bag with me, so I've got a small bag. I'll tell you about that in just a minute. I'll just set that aside here. Down inside of that, more clothes. Can't wear all my clothes at the same time. Long johns. These are let me just take a look at them here. Yeah, well, they say Polar Max. That's what they are. These are lightweight Polar Max long johns. This is a long john top, and hidden down in here is a long john bottom, because these are also a polyester. If they're wet, they're still warm. So now I've got a double layer of pants on. I've got, well, there's a lot of clothes coming out of here, isn't there? See, it's all fit into a small pack, and that's part of the clue to this. I cheated. I brought along my favorite cup so I could have my coffee in the morning. I hate to be real cranky, and I am without the coffee, so I brought this along. And now, say, well, what did this guy eat? More than what you saw. It's true. I brought emergency rations. What I brought were these. I brought 2 packages of these things here. These are both eaten up here, because once in a while I get hungry. But they're called Mainstay Emergency Food Rations, and each one of these little foil bags here holds roughly 2,400 calories of semi-edible chow. And it's broken into 6 little bars, and each bar is worth about 400 calories. So I carried, for 14 days, I carried 2 packages of this. And this is what I got to eat. I'd break off a little piece of this in the morning with my coffee, and then a little bit later in the afternoon. So I'd keep a few calories sliding in. Now, as you probably already know because of the video, 4,800 calories is probably what I would use in a single day. But this is what I had for 2 weeks, in addition to, of course, the thistles and other stuff. But this is my emergency food, and it's really handy stuff because it will get you through. Also down here in the bottom, I have my trash bags. I brought 4 of those heavy-duty construction trash bags. Whoops, I guess that's the end of that. Yep, my Took can and something else. Because we have a Camelback pack here, we have the Camelback drinking system. So in the back of this thing is a bladder that holds 100 ounces of water. And what I did is I made a slice in the middle of the tube that goes from the bladder to my mouth and put a water filter on it. And that water filter will take out Giardia and all kinds of other things. This is a very safe water filter, but it just fits right in line. And they're very, very inexpensive. This one is called Safe Water System. So I'm able to just fill it up in a stream and drink right out of it, and that way I can stay fully hydrated during the course of the journey. So there is the main pack. Now I said I'd show you that other little one. This little one went with me just about everywhere, and this is kind of my if you got to have it, this is where it's going to be found. On the zipper here, I've got one of those little tiny mini lights here, just in case I need one. And I'll just zip that baby open. And inside, I have insect repellent. You'll notice these are in a Ziploc bag. Insect repellent and something that you may not have thought to bring along, a little bottle of hand sanitizers, alcohol-based. Now, my hands are never clean on these things, but sometimes I handle things that even I get disgusted with, and it's a good idea to have some of this hand sanitizer around. And if you cut yourself, you can sprinkle some of this on there and it'll help to kill the bad guys. But I keep these things together handy in the outside of this little pouch. I always know where it is because the same things are going to be in here each time. I also carry along just my little PAL light here, which you've seen before. This little baby here, I didn't even change the batteries on it. It's the same battery that went up there for the full 2 weeks. I have my iodine water crystals and an emergency space blanket. All that stuff is right in the front, right where I need it. If there's an emergency, I could reach in, cover myself up from the rain, or purify water, or light the way, whatever I need to do. Inside the main compartment, a pair of small binoculars. I prefer these. Well, I like stronger binoculars. These are 9 power, 9x26s. These ones are made by Minolta. Nikon makes some great ones, but I always carry a pair of small binoculars with me. I've got my little flint napping finger goodie here to protect my palm if I decide to do some flint napping, but there was no flint to nap, so I didn't do that. Only napping I did was for sleep. And, well, oh yeah, you might wonder what that was. Moleskin. M-O-L-E-S-K-I-N. It's Dr. Scholl stuff. If you get a blister on your heel or whatever, this stuff here has got an adhesive backing on it. You just peel off the adhesive, slap it on your blister, and put your shoes back on and start hiking. It's also good for sucking chest wounds. If you get around through your chest, why, just get up and slap this baby on. It keeps the sucking from going on, and you can walk on. Great. Small thermometer for telling the temperature. You never know. When I'm shivering inside my shelter, I can stick it outside. Oh, no wonder I'm so cold. A little bit of cordage. And, there's that little radio that you saw. Normally it's not that far down. A little fire starting set made out of some steel wool and cotton and a striker and so forth. And the Swiss Army knife. Oh, and a candle. And I think that's about it, except one little thing. And that's this. Sometimes when you're hunting, it's nice to sound like you're part of the wilderness out there. And this is a little bird call. You can get these in different places. You just do this. You're just twisting this little end here, and it scrapes against a piece of wood. And it kind of lets the other animals think that everything's okay, and they'll stick their heads out, and that's when they fall in the stew pot. So that's just a little gadget that I like to carry around, and of course this hangs around my shoulders, so when I go out hunting or fishing or whatever, this thing is always with me, and I'm ready to go. Now, let me show you some more stuff. About the most important piece of equipment you've got with you is your shelter and your blanket, and that's what this is. This is my bedroll. Now, there probably are about as many ways to put together a bedroll as there are people, and this is just a way I tie it up sometimes, and sometimes I tie it up different. But in here is a blanket and some other stuff, but it's covered with my tarp. Let me show you something about this. The way I've got it here, I can hang it over my shoulder if I put a cord on it and wear it across my back. If I want to, I can break my wrist and wear it about like this around my fanny and go like that. It's kind of comfortable. Or you could wear it in front. Doesn't make any difference. Put it on top of your head. Pretend like you're a bedroll. But it's a real easy thing. It weighs, as I say, about 6 pounds. Let me show you what goes into it. First of all, I've got this tied together with my 1-inch tubular webbing, which I always carry with me. And I'm going to untie it here. Now the tarp is a waterproof tarp. It's waterproofed on both sides. One side is, of course, camouflage, and the other side is just a kind of a dark green, like so. Now inside is a little gear. First of all, I've got some more of this headband material. I use it for drying myself if I take a bath, and or whatever. But I keep some of that in there, and that way it's always dry. I've got something to dry up if it starts to rain. I keep extra parachute cord in there. And you'll notice there's a carabiner tied to the end. This is so I can just unwrap this and toss the carabiner over a low branch of a tree and attach it to my tarp, and I've got a quickie shelter. But it's ready to go, and it's got the carabiner attached. Inside, and you can see it's all protected by the tarp itself, is my blanket. There we go. You see, it just folds over like that, and then I roll it up. Now, I'm a pretty cheap guy, and this is a pretty cheap blanket. This is a blanket we picked up at some kind of a volume merchandising company, and it's for a queen-size bed. And it is a polyester material. I know someplace on here there's a name for what it is. Yeah, it says, do not remove under penalty of death. Yeah, it's called Velux, V-E-L-L-U-X blanket, and it's queen size. But it's real thick, and if it rains on it, it stays warm. It's just like wool, but it's inexpensive, very lightweight, it compresses pretty well, and it's cheap, so you can really mangle these things if you want. I tried to mangle it, but it didn't tear very well, so darn it, I was defeated by a cheap blanket. But this is all I had for protection in temperatures down in the 20-degree range or so on every night. And I showed you one way to wrap up in it too. But that is my main sleeping gear. But remember, I'm also wearing all of the clothing that I have. So all of that clothing plus this is my sleeping protection. And then, of course, there's the tarp. So I could string the tarp as a shelter and lay under it. I could put this under me. I could fill it up with pine needles or do whatever I want with it, but it's a waterproof tarp, gives me great protection. And this particular tarp measures about 6 feet by 8 feet. So that's roughly the size of the tarp. And that is all there is to the gear on this trip. I know what you just saw looked like a case of motor mouth, but I was trying to get a lot of information into the shortest amount of time. If you didn't catch something that was on this list here, go to our website, take a look. The list for the solo survival trip is right on there, and you can go through there and print it out and do whatever you want with it. Modify it, change it, make it happen the way you want. Just remember, if you do go solo survivaling, do it with a friend.
For the purposes of describing knives, I want to break them down into 3 different categories. The first one is the custom knife. Now, a custom knife is a knife where a man takes a piece of steel and a chunk of micarta, and using grinders and heat treating mechanisms and so forth, he builds a knife one at a time. He builds them for you. You could have him make it in any specific way you want. You could have things change, colors of the handle change, length of the blade, whatever. But each knife is made individually, one at a time. Oh yeah, and custom knives are generally the most expensive knife you can buy. The next level is the semi-custom knives, and those will be knives like those made by Tops. In a semi-custom knife, a machine actually cuts out the shape of each of the blades, and they're all the same. But from that point forward, the knives are handled by hand. All of the grinding, the shape of the handles, all of the work that goes into it, the coating, the tempering, everything is done by hand. So it's semi-custom. All the blades are the same, but each one is made by hand. The third level would be the full production knife, and that's a knife where they hand a big old piece of steel to a machine, and after a series of processes, it pumps out a knife. Now, these knives can be very, very good, like the Becker line of knives. Those tools are inexpensive, they're strong, they're well designed, but they're all identical. And for that reason, they're less expensive than the semi-custom or the custom knives. In this video, you will have seen all 3 different types of knives, the custom, the semi-custom, and the production knives in operation. And all the knives that you've seen in here have met the Woodsmaster test of durability. So any of these knives that you've seen, you can trust with your life. You've already been seeing this knife in this video quite a bit. This is a new knife put out by Tops called the Magnum Folder. And this is one hardy knife. This is not exactly a pocket knife, but it is a huge folder and very, very solid. Like all of Tops knives, it's extremely well made. You can see how that thing pops open. It's got a big blade, and if you don't like carrying a fixed blade knife, this thing here will do most of the jobs that a fixed blade knife will do. It's got an extremely solid locking mechanism built in, and the locking mechanism is right here. It's called a liner lock.
The way it works is part of the liner, and that's the portion inside the knife here, snaps in, watch this, to hold the blade in place. And this is a tough kind of a locking mechanism to make, because some of the people who make these don't do a very good job, and they're not sturdy. But the ones by Tops are very, very solid and will definitely lock the blade in place. Let me show you a couple other kinds of knives that we used up here and the types of locking mechanisms that they incorporate. If you're looking for a sturdy folder, you might consider this one by Almar as well. Now the Tops folder is, of course, a very large knife, and if you want one just a little smaller that'll fit in your pocket, this one here, made by Almar, also incorporates the liner lock mechanism. You can see it right in here. Pushed out of the way, she locks up like that. But this is a great little knife, and it's very, very solid. It's called the Sear 2000, and I highly recommend it. This little pocket knife here is another one by Almar, and it has a different kind of a locking mechanism on it. I really want to talk about locking mechanisms. This one here is called a lockback, and you can see this little piece of steel sticking out here. You simply press down on that, and that releases the blade. If you look up in the front there, you can see the mechanism snap down into place to lock it. That's another way of locking a blade on a locking pocket knife. This one, as I say, is made by Almar. There's other designs, lots of them. There's this one here is made by a company, I think it was called Paul, but this is a Paul button lock, some people call it. You press a little button on the side here, like this, squeeze it, and the blade opens up and locks into place. To put it back away, you just squeeze it, and it goes back to bed. Nice little knife, kind of hard to find. And then you've all seen the knife that I carry around a lot called the Swiss Army knife. This one is the rucksack model. This also has a locking blade, and it looks like a switch on the side. And all of these are pretty secure. With this one here, you just pull the switch down. It's hard to see, my thumb gets in the way, like that. That unlocks the blade and you can fold it. If you don't press it, it won't fold. So that's a couple of different kinds of locking mechanisms that you'll find on pocket knives. You've already seen this little fire genie thing that I've been using to start fires and so forth, and I carry this everywhere I go. But the fellow that makes it, a guy named Rick Palm, also makes this little buddy here. It looks like an arrowhead, but when you fold it like so, a little blade pops out like that, and you can use it for opening boxes or whatever. And you can hook it around your neck, or you can put it on your keychain or whatever. And it's called a foreskinner, and it's a nice little pocket knife, and it won't disturb anybody, but it's with you all the time. This ugly piece of steel is the Becker tack tool, and this is probably one of the most useful tools we brought along on this trip. It's made out of 1/4-inch steel, and it holds a great edge. The funny point on the end here is useful for digging up roots and other things. We use it for something like a shovel. Just shovel it in the ground like so and pop up the ground, and that gives you access to bulbs and what have you. This little section in here is something like a gutting hook, but we actually use this to pull cans out of the fire and so forth. The edge along here works great as a chopper because there's plenty of weight in the steel, and down closer to the handle we have a serrated edge that is useful for cutting cord and other fabrics. So this is a great tool at a great price. It's a Becker tack tool. This is the custom knife for this trip. It's a Trace Rinaldi Armageddon. Now Trace is a master knife maker, and this piece shows some of his work. This blade is about 10 inches long. Oh, don't pay attention to the blood spots on here. I'll get those off eventually. But it's about 10 inches long. It's got a G10 handle, which is similar to my Carta, only a little bit stronger. It also has 2 choils. That's these little depressions right here. There's one and another. The advantage of that is when you're gripping the knife, you can grip farther back on the blade, like so, or farther forward, like that. That increases the strength of the blade as a chopper, or it gives you more control. If you're pinching up here, you could cut in close up in this portion of the blade, or if you really want to whack hard, you grab her back here. Either way, it gives you a lot of good control over the blade. It's a solid knife made out of A2 steel, and one of the best custom knives that I have in my collection. I really like this knife. It sings to me when I'm working with it. As you can see, here's Trace's mark right there, but right next to it is another little mark. This is Paul Boss's mark, and Paul is one of the master heat treaters in the United States, and he does a lot of work for custom makers like Trace. But this is one fantastic knife, and if you can afford it, I definitely recommend you consider a Trace Rinaldi blade. A little something about the sheath here. This is actually underneath all of this. This is one of Trace's sheaths. But what I did is I covered it with buckskin. I just stitched up a little sleeve, if you will, and then coated the outside of the Kydex sheath that came with the knife with some rubber cement and slid this on there to give it a leather look. On the outside of the sheath here you can see a little companion knife. This was also made by Trace Rinaldi, and this little baby here is made out of D2 steel, also heat treated by Paul Boss, but that's a handy little carving knife. In order to increase the utility of the knife, this section right up in here, you can see a piece of wire sticking out, and I stuck that out there just so you could see it. This is actually where I keep my mini kit on this sheath. What I've done is on the back of the sheath, you can see this piece of leather here is all sort of tied on here. If you take all of this strapping off, this piece of leather will come off, and you could put it together, including these two straps here, turn that into a sling for slinging stones. But when it comes off, the contents of the mini kit are all held in here behind this piece of leather. So when you're on the trail, put that baby together like that, mini kit, chopping knife, whittling knife, you're ready to go. I know knives can get pretty boring after a while, but I never get bored with them, and I did want to show you what we brought along on this trip. Now, you didn't see all of these knives being used, but some of them you did, and I wanted to kind of give you an explanation of what we had along. Let's start down here. These first two knives are the knives that you've already seen. These are the knives by Trace Rinaldi, the big Armageddon, and its little companion knife. By the way, you can see how nicely the big Armageddon cleaned up. There's rust just doesn't stick to that steel. So I'll set these aside. That thing, those two worked very hard. The next knife is the big old Tops Magnum that I use. You've seen this quite a bit in there, making a lot of, well, doing the cleaning and making the fish hooks and so forth. This was the big pocket knife that I used all the way through it. Excellent knife, very, very durable, hardly even shows the wear. Although you didn't see it being used in there, I also used the little ATAX tool that we make, and this did a lot of chopping for us. At least not for us so much as for me. I used it a lot. And those are the knives that I worked with. Now, so you know, some people may not be interested in having a big knife like the Trace Rinaldi Armageddon. So Trace also makes some similar knives with similar features here. This one here is called the Tempest, and it's a smaller knife based on the Armageddon, and another one here called the Chimera. But these are both Trace Rinaldi knives, excellent little blades, and served very well in the field. Another one that we used a lot, and you saw this, I believe, in Karen's video. This is her favorite little knife here. This is the Smoke Jumper made by Tops. Great knife, great handle, it's awesome knife. This is a tough little sucker, and everybody in camp ended up using that one. Another one that Tops puts out is called the Solo, believe it or not, and this is a sweet little knife. This one here might not be legal in all states because this portion is sharpened on the one I have. They also make it without a sharpened spine. But it's a real nice little knife. It's sweet, quick handling. It's, of course, made with all of the quality that Tops puts into their blades. This one here you saw made by Becker, and you saw this being used a lot. We actually had another knife that was called the Brute, which is a big knife like the Trace Rinaldi knife here that served very, very well. It was called the Brute, and somehow it disappeared, so I can't show it to you, but it was in the video in different places. Another thing that we saw in there a lot of were these big tomahawks here made by the American Tomahawk Company. This one's called the Ranger, and the guys had a lot of fun with these. They did a lot of chopping with them. If you don't want to use a big knife, a tomahawk's a lot of fun. You could chop with it. You could use it for just about anything you want. But these are great tools, and I gained a lot of respect for the company that makes these during the course of this trip.
One of the duties that Brian and I are providing here, other than providing crew support for the shoot, is we're providing security. Speaking of shoot, what I'm using here is a Desert Eagle 44 Magnum semi-automatic pistol. The 44 Magnum fires a round that's almost a half an inch across. And frankly, if you're going to carry a pistol, there's no success like excess.
For my part in the security, I'm carrying a Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum pistol. It carries 6 rounds, and that way as a team we can provide security, as Ray has said, for Ron and Karen.
Well, Brian and Ray have been maintaining the security of the camp and protecting Karen and I from all the monsters that roam these mountains. I have my own protection from Brian and Ray. This is a .45 caliber Glock. There are 10 rounds. That's 5 for each. With that kind of firepower, I know that I'm safe from the hairy monster and that big guy with long legs.
Since these guys just want to sit around and talk about their guns, I'm going to talk about mine too. I carry a stainless steel 357 Magnum Ruger. It's got 6 shots in it, and when Ron's got these 2 guys under control, I got this for Ron, so I'll have plenty of food out here in the wilderness. Woo! I think that fish is dead.